I'm a retired detective superintendent, and over the past 20 years, I've dealt with some of the most horrific and upsetting murders, some of which still haunt me to this day.
This is Cut to the Crime. Chris, you're a retired homicide detective. So is there any cases that have really stuck with you in your career?
A really famous case, actually, that I was SI on, I'm really proud of, and it'll stick with me the rest of my life, really. Getting quite emotional now. So in October 1997, the body of Samantha was found on the banks of the River Humber.
Okay.
She'd been really badly beaten. Her injuries were horrific. She looked as if she'd been in a car crash. But their actual cause of death from the post-mortem was actual strangulation. So there was an enormous murder inquiry. 3,000 people were interviewed.
Wow.
The post-mortem found a DNA sample. They found some semen inside Samantha,
right,
which gave a full profile. Unfortunately, it wasn't on the database. And then about 18 months later, a male called Gary Allen stopped drink driving in Hull.
Okay.
And they took his DNA when they charged him with a drink driving offence, and then that was a perfect match. His defence was, yes, he did have sex with Samantha. The condom split. She got annoyed. She left the car and she stormed off, and that was the last time he saw her. And the jury couldn't decide whether he was lying or not.
Right.
So he was acquitted. So that was in 2000. He moved on to Plymouth, and within 6 weeks he'd attacked 2 sex workers. Exactly the same, and a hand round the neck. Luckily, on the second attack, there was a police officer nearby who intervened, and he was apprehended. So he served 10 years in prison, and he came out in 2010. If you look at him in the street, he's a real unassuming person. If he was convicted of Samantha's murder in 2000, perhaps he certainly wouldn't have attacked those 2 sex workers in Plymouth, because he'd be in prison. He moved back up to Humberside. The chief constable was so concerned that it was coming back into his area, he authorised an undercover operation. The whole point of that operation was to obviously protect members of the public, particularly sex workers, but also it was to see if they could gather any further evidence that would help in the murder of Samantha Class, that would help solve the case.
Right.
They decided to introduce another undercover officer who we knew as Ian, and Gary Allen struck up a relationship with Ian, and he told him that he'd murdered a prostitute in Hull, he'd strangled her and dumped her body in the Humber.
I had sex with this prostitute one night, and the condom split, and she said, I want your name and I want your address, your money and everything else. I'm going to tell the police you raped me. So I strangled her. And I dumped her in the Humber.
Bloody hell. So, like, it's so matter of fact. Terrible.
That was the confession that they all, really that's what they wanted. It was absolutely fantastic for the investigation team. Unfortunately, the DPP's office weren't sure whether they would be able to get a retrial until 2019. Elena Grolakova was a sex worker that went missing on Boxing Day 2018.
Okay.
And her body was found in April 2019. I was asked to be the SIO on that case, obviously. A bit of trepidation because it was such a high-profile case. She was found in water. She'd found to be strangled, so it was exactly the same as Samantha Class. Gary Allen was immediately a suspect because they knew that he had some type of relationship with Elena. All of a sudden, we have to review everything on my case, review the undercover confession, and get a file ready. When we interviewed him, we brought up the undercover evidence. He obviously thought that Ian was a friend, and that's the only time he showed a bit of emotion. You saw some tears in his eyes.
Right. Amazing.
Yeah.
What does that feel like when you got through that?
I think the best feeling was when I went to see Samantha Class's daughter.
Okay.
And I told himself that we've got this undercover evidence, we've got enough to charge him, and he will go to trial. That feeling was just, you could see the family were just really emotional. And I got emotional.
Yeah.
I'm getting emotional now. Can't describe it. It's just brilliant.
You've helped pull all this together.
Yeah.
You feel quite strongly about it.
Yeah, because you're, as you say, you're in charge. If it all went wrong, I'd
all
be
on you.
responsible. But he didn't, and the jury saw through him, and he got convicted of both murders, and he was sentenced to 37 years. But he's a serial killer, so it's actually taken him off the streets for the rest of his life, and that's what I feel really proud, immensely proud of, and I'm so honoured to work on it.
Were there any other cases that really stuck with you?
So, 2019, there was the murder of John Hamer, and she was murdered by her husband. And she was married to him for about 27 years. They had 3 children. You wouldn't think there was any problems in the family, but he was a controlling alcoholic.
Right.
And unfortunately, they had a domestic incident in May 2019 where he actually strangled her with her own dressing gown cord. I was called as senior investigating officer. Obviously, there's a lot of pressure from the start because you've got a murder and you don't know where the suspect is, and you've got the press involved, and you've got the public worrying.
Yeah.
Because he's on the run, he's just murdered his wife, he could do anything. What he did do, actually, he went to a town not far away and drank all night and snorted cocaine. But luckily, and fantastic work from an off-duty police officer, so he apprehended him and called for backup.
Is there like a reason that kind of really sticks with you, like from a personal aspect?
You see all the family pictures and how happy they were and everything. And that's probably what gets to me, because he's just ruined it, hasn't he? And he's just ruined the lives of his children. Really feel for him, because what do? You never, ever get over it, do you?
No, of course.
Never will get over it.
What was his sentence?
He received 22 years. Justice has been done. Policing is a really difficult job, and not many people can do it, but being a senior investigating officer is also a really proud moment for me, because there was no female SIOs when I joined the force. And having as many chief constables as we have now in the UK, I think it just shows that women can do the job just as good as men.
Amazing. Beautifully said. So, Chris, you finished your hair. We're going to give you the big reveal. You excited?
I am.
Amazing.
Thank
I'm
you
going to
very
spin you
much.
around.
Oh, wow.
Liking it?
Yeah, love
Feeling
it.
good?
Absolutely love it. Now I've got my new hairstyle. Can I have a selfie?
Of course. There we go. Listening to Chris tell her experience about the conviction shows you how tirelessly the police work behind the scenes to catch the people who are the perpetrators behind these crimes.
I'm one of the UK's leading facial identification experts, recreating the faces of the unidentified, and sometimes that can feel miraculous.
This is Cut to the Crime. So, Caroline, we're going to cut your hair. What would you like to do?
I think just get a bit of weight off it, really, in the middle and the front. That's all right.
Yeah, nice.
I'm a forensic anthropologist, but I specialise in what's called craniofacial identification, so basically anything to do with skulls, faces and identity. And we recreate the faces of unidentified people. So we work within forensic investigation settings. So when the police have a body that they don't know who the person is and there are not many clues, then they'll often ask for us to depict the face of the individual in the hope that someone will then recognise them and that will lead to an identification.
Are there any cases in your career that have really stood out to you?
Yeah, one of the first cases I ever did was of a young girl, and her remains were found on a beach next to a lake in the Netherlands. She was thought to be about 5 years of age, 5 or 6 years of age. Yeah. Her remains were in parts, so her head and the torso and the limbs were separately found.
Right.
And that there was decomposition, and obviously the conditions of being in water meant that it was difficult to identify. So in 2001 we were still working in clay, where we modelled the anatomical structures directly onto a replica of the skull. Okay. I can show you actually. Yeah. So this is that case.
Wow.
So you can see this is a replica, plaster copy of her skull, and this is her muscle structure that had been modelled on in Cornish modelling clay.
Right, okay. What are these, all the points then, or?
Those are the tissue depth pegs.
Right,
so those are the average tissue depths for somebody of her age and her sex.
Right.
And then this is the finished head in clay.
Amazing.
And they took their head back to the Netherlands and then held a press conference with the Dutch police where they released information about the head and about the case to try and get an identification.
Did that help?
Well,
Did it make a difference?
Yeah, I think they got about 600 leads from the public, and then quite quickly, within days, they identified her. And then eventually her woman's stepfather or boyfriend of her mother, I don't know which, were convicted of her murder.
So you're a massive part in literally making that happen.
It's always great to help identify someone because that's really important in a kind of forensic setting. And this one was particularly challenging for me because my daughter was about the same age at the time. So it was quite emotional in a way that it isn't normally actually in forensic cases, because I think we separate what we're doing very, very easily. But it was more difficult to do that because of her age. So it did feel great that she was identified really quickly.
Yeah. So what would be the most challenging parts of your job?
Well, I think maybe the more recent work with our migrant identification is the most challenging, because we do go to the post-mortem room, we do go to the mortuary for that and collect data, and just the volume of that and the fact that it's mostly young people, you know, can be quite emotionally challenging to see time and time again young people who have died just trying to reach a better world, and only about 22% of those are ever identified.
Right. Is there much in, obviously, from what you started and how you do it now as a process to what it used to be?
So I've been doing this for more than 35 years, and in that time, the first big step change was digital technology, both in terms of clinical imaging and also in terms of 3D modelling.
Yeah.
And then there was a big step change with kind of CGI techniques and our ability to make it as realistic as possible.
Okay.
And then just recently, the new step change that is kind of happening, not quite there yet, but is on the cards for happening, is kind of DNA to face, the results of what DNA can tell us about face shape and face detail, as well as skin texture, etc. There's always something new to learn.
So are there any cases you're working on at the moment or working on recently that are using the new methods with computer reconstruction?
Yes, and this was a woman's body that was found in a place near Edinburgh called Corstorphine.
Right.
In a shallow grave.
Okay.
And they didn't really know who she was. They asked for this depiction to be produced, which we did in our 3D computer system, and then this is the end 2D result. As you can see, it's in black and white.
Yeah, of course,
And then she was eventually recognised by her family in Ireland. She was from Ireland, a lady called Phyllis Dunleavy.
That's incredible.
Again, pretty quickly. After the police released the image, she was identified by relatives in Ireland, and then soon after that, her son was arrested and then convicted a year or so later.
Where are you today? What's your work look like?
So now I have a research group called Face Lab, which sits within a forensic research institute.
Amazing.
Face Lab is made up of a number of people from very varied backgrounds, actually, some artists, some scientists, and we work in this craniofacial identification field.
So where do you see it going?
From a forensic investigation, it's more likely to go down the DNA to face route.
Yeah, I could talk to you for hours, but we haven't got that much time to talk, so I appreciate you telling it all. It's been fascinating.
Oh, pleasure.
Thank you. So, Caroline, we've finished. You've finished your haircut. We're going to give you the big reveal.
Great.
Are you excited to see the end result?
Very much.
Yeah, let's spin you around, show you what's going on.
Nice.
Liking it?
Yeah, I love it. Should we get a selfie?
100%, let's do it. I think the main lesson to be taken away from Caroline's story is how impactful her work is, even though it's behind the scenes, is so important to help get justice for families.
My Uncle Tony Paris was wrongly convicted of murder, and as a result of that, it's devastated both his and our family's lives.
This is Cut to the Crime. So, Michael, we're cutting your hair.
Okay.
What are we doing?
So I like a bit trimmed off the top, like an 80s.
Flat top vibe?
Yes.
Nice. What's your story, Michael? What are you here to tell us about?
So I'm nephew of Tony Paris. He is one of the 3 people who was wrongly convicted of murder of Lynette White in Bute Town, South Wales. It resulted in 5 people being charged, a huge miscarriage of justice.
So this is the Cardiff 5 case, is that correct?
It is indeed the Cardiff 5 case.
When did this all happen?
Lynette White was found on Valentine's Day in 1988.
Right.
So they ended up in court in 1990.
Right.
Out of the 5 people in that court case, 3 people were convicted, which was my Uncle Tony, Tony Paris, Yusuf Abdullahi, and Stephen Miller. People on that day seen a white person with blood stains over his hands.
Right.
That's what the police were made aware of.
Okay.
But it resulted in black people or minority people being arrested by the police. If you can imagine, back in the 80s, there was no DNA, so they worked on blood grouping. They did find foreign blood at the scene at the time,
Right.
but it wasn't linked to any of the people who they charged or convicted.
How were they convicted of this crime with none of that information?
Well, they were convicted by 3 witnesses,
Right.
who were pressured into giving false testimonies.
And what do you feel from the police's angle they wanted from this?
Well, Cardiff Bay was a new development, and they couldn't have had a ongoing murder, a gruesome murder, while they were trying to get investment in the area. So I believe that they needed to close the case
Right.
as quickly as possible.
Just case closed, that's it, done.
Yes.
Awful.
Yeah, he was convicted for life.
And what was that like when that came through as a verdict to the family?
Absolute devastation, because none of us expected anything like this to happen
Yeah.
to any of our family. So when the guilty verdict was announced and my uncle was sentenced, my mother nearly collapsed in a dock, purely at the disbelief of how they could find a person guilty based on a case with no evidence.
Mind-blowing.
My other uncle Lloyd then, following the convictions, said that we need to start a campaign.
Right.
That's when the Cardiff Free campaign was born. One of the biggest campaigns that South Wales have ever seen,
Right.
to raise the fact that there was an injustice, and then finally to get my uncle Yusuf and Stephen Miller released from prison for something they didn't do.
So when your uncle was arrested, you were 6 years old?
Yep.
How does something like that impact a 6-year-old? What does that do to them moving forward in their life?
The correct word to use, but the word I wouldn't have understood at the time, would be probably anxiety. And as kids, we only seen bad people on TV. You never ever expected that your family would be considered a bad person.
No.
It was something that made many of our family not even want to leave the house because of the shame and the embarrassment
Really?
brought on our family as a result of this.
So it impacts everyone in so many different ways.
Yeah, definitely.
Have you got any memories of your childhood with Tony when you were growing up?
Yeah, definitely. But I've got some photos.
Amazing, yeah, show us.
So yeah, so that's a picture of him there.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah,
There's young there, obviously.
a youngster. Yeah, that's before I was born. But
Okay.
yeah, so
Yeah.
that's one with my mother.
Yeah.
This is in his later days.
Yeah.
He was a happy-go-lucky guy, and always into visiting the family, always there, and yeah, he was a pleasure to be around as an uncle.
So how successful was the campaign?
Very successful. It resulted in their release,
Amazing. All 3 of the men.
all 3 of them.
Incredible.
But the way the system worked was when they were cleared in the Court of Appeal, that they'd actually just cleared them based on the way the police had investigated the bullying tactics. So it didn't necessarily say that they were innocent of it. They said that the process wasn't done correct.
Right,
And that's why
okay.
they were cleared.
He's been in prison for how long at this time?
So about 4 years. Even though he was very, very happy,
Yeah.
he wasn't the same uncle that before he went in. So he was
Right.
a completely different character when he was released compared to the one that had gone in. He just stayed in his house, stayed in his room, didn't really mix with anybody.
So was the real perpetrator of the crime ever found?
Yes, Jeffrey Gafford.
What was the timescale on that?
15-year time scale, and he was caught based on DNA evidence.
So 2003?
Around that time,
Right,
yes.
yeah. So he's caught, he's convicted?
Yes.
Yeah.
Pleads guilty.
Yeah.
Acknowledges that the Cardiff Five had no involvement.
Really?
Yes.
And what was that like for the family?
It was nice to get, and I will say, partial justice.
Right.
Because we can finally say that our names have been cleared.
Right.
So the embarrassment of always being associated with it sort of, well, dissipated from our perspective, but not full justice, as in the police and the crime prosecution service haven't been held accountable.
Bringing it up to the present day, how is Tony now?
So unfortunately, he passed away.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, in October 2022.
Does the impact of what happened to him all those years ago still resonate in your family?
Yes, it does. I don't think anybody will ever forget what happened to my uncle. Hopefully, by commemorating, keeping his memory alive, it will prevent a similar instance happening again.
So, Michael, we've done your haircut. We're going to give you the big reveal. Are you excited to see the end result?
I am, yes. Oh, nice.
Feeling good?
Yes.
Keeping the flat top vibes, nice and tidy, freshening the beard up, putting it all together. Thank you so much for sharing the story about yourself, your family's experience, and your uncle.
Yes, you're welcome. Would you mind a selfie?
Of course.
Okay.
Let's get it done. The story of the Cardiff Five blows my mind. I can't imagine what it must be like for an innocent person to go to prison. And then effectively, years later, the perpetrator gets found, gets sentenced, and goes to prison. When Michael showed me the pictures of Tony through his life, and then after the incident, you can see it's affected him physically, mentally. You can see it in his eyes even through the pictures. What a terrible thing to happen to somebody.